The following show is brought to you in part by support from Robbins, Kaplan, Miller, and Cerisi. We don't just practice law, we make history. Online at rkmc.com.
Hello and welcome. I'm delighted to introduce you tonight to my guest, Ralph Rapson. Cesar Pelli, the well-known architect, said about Ralph that he is a legend in the history of modern architecture. And we certainly know that. And so pleased you could come back. I interviewed you about 3 years ago.
Yes.
And we've
It's a
kept
pleasure.
in touch.
Very
and
happy to.
Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you.
Number 90 just
90
rolled,
big ones, 90 big ones.
rolled by. How are you feeling, Ralph?
I'm doing very well, even though I'm 90. I said at the 90th birthday that 90 was a good number because you can roll me over on my back, you can turn me upside down, you can push me forward or backwards, diagonally. And if you do it just right, I'm only 69.
Right? Oh, you look wonderful.
Thank you.
I want to just tell you a bit about Mr. Rapson's background. If you are new to Minnesota and don't know some of his history, I think you'll find this interesting. You were born in Michigan, in
Right.
Alma, Michigan, back in 1914. He got his Bachelor of Architecture at the University of Michigan and then got a wonderful scholarship to the Cranbrook Academy.
Right.
And that really was a turning point in your life, wasn't it?
Very much so, yes.
Well,
It was a great opportunity to work with the great Eliel Saarinen
yes.
and his son, Eero Saarinen, who was an equally great architect. So, and the whole atmosphere and the people I worked with at Cranbrook, Charlie Eames, Harry Weiss, Harry Bertoya, many others, made it very exciting, very dynamic 4 years I was there.
And while you were there, you got into things beyond architecture too, didn't you? You did some
Yes,
designing and...
Well, Cranbrook had many different studios, and we were encouraged to make use of the metal shop or the ceramic or the weaving studio, photography. So I did many things, and in fact I even wove enough material to make myself a jacket, a sports
Really?
jacket.
Wow.
It looked so awful when I got down that I never wore it again, but but I did a lot of work in the ceramics department and photography. And I got interested very much in all of the arts, supporting arts.
Do you think had you not gone to Cranbrook, do you think you would have become as eclectic as you have become?
I probably would not have. I think the Cranbrook was a turning point. It was a great influence on me. I think, yes, going to other places where it was strictly architectural, urban design, I would not have had that broad push, if you will, that made me interested in furniture design and architecture and urban design and all the other arts.
Yes, you've had a broad swath, a broad continuum of interests and talents. After he was at Cranbrook, he went to MIT, where he was an associate professor in architecture from 46 to 54, quite a long time, and then came to the University of Minnesota and was here and headed our School of Architecture at the U from 54 to 84, 30 years. And really during that period made some major wonderful contributions to our
thank you.
area.
I like to say it took them 30 years to discover my incompetence. But I'd like to go back I was at MIT for about 8 years. But about 4 of those years were abroad. I took a year's leave of absence to do some American embassies in Europe.
Yes, and you did an embassy in
Stockholm,
Oslo,
and Copenhagen, and The Hague in Holland.
Athens,
and a consulate in Bremen, the embassy in Oslo, Norway.
That must have been a wonderfully exciting time.
It was 4 years of working in those countries, being not only a tourist but also being working there. So it was but I took 1 year leave of absence, then I took a 2nd year's leave of absence, and that was granted, and I asked for a 3rd year's leave of absence, and that was granted. Finally I took a 4th year, asked for a 4th year, and finally they said, look, are you on our faculty or aren't you?
I bet. You were pushing them.
I came back after about 4 years in Europe, but that was great, great fun, great excitement, because I could see and visit all the historical places that I had studied as an architect and planner, and just visit all the buildings.
Have you kept track of how many countries you have lived in and traveled to? Because your wonderful book, Sketches and Drawings from Around the World, I thought, my goodness, I don't know anyone else who's traveled and seen as many places as you have.
Well, I was fortunate to have assignments and interest and the opportunities I more or less went around the world twice. I wouldn't be able to tell you the number of countries, and there are many countries that I wish I could have seen and I would like to, but we'll see. Time will tell.
Where would you, if you could travel somewhere this year, where would you choose to go, and what would you want to see in that country?
Mary, that's almost impossible to answer. I'd like to go to so many places. One of my favorite places was Portugal, as a matter of fact. But I'd like to go to the Balkan countries. I'd like to go deep into Russia, more into South America. I only went to Brazil and Argentina and a few places, but there's so many wonderful places around the world I'd love to go to.
I want to just show people a peek at some of your, or at a sketch here from this book, which represents this sketch I just opened to by chance is from Scotland. And let's see if we can zoom in here on this. I just was charmed by your drawings and sketches.
Well, thank you.
And
I enjoy drawing. It's what I've enjoyed all my life, and I think I do architecture because I like to draw principally, and I like to draw people. That was just an old castle in Scotland. In my travels, I like to find the old, and I like to find the new. Whatever happens I usually go without an itinerary. I just like to wander about and experience the country as much as I can.
And did
in a
Mary
rather limited time.
Did your wife Mary like to travel as much as you did, Ralph?
Mary traveled with me many times, yes, but there were occasions when I was alone.
Speaking of Mary, I told you earlier I was just charmed by your description of your wedding day to Mary.
Yes.
And this was back in 1949. Just recount for the audience what went on that day, because it was fun.
Mary was working with the dean's secretary, or right-hand man at MIT, and we decided to get married. I had long admired the small village greens that exist in New England states. So we had no place in mind, but we started out. We picked up Mary's sister.
You're
older
eloping
sister.
in a sense, right?
In a sense, we were eloping, although there was no problem with the family. But we drove and drove around quite some time. Finally found a small, what I thought would be a perfect New England village green. You know, the kind that had a church on one side, maybe the courthouse or the city hall, and some houses and so on. So we decided, I believe it was Hanson, but we needed witnesses. So down the road a bit, we saw a farmer working his fields, and we asked him if he would come and be a best man to our wedding. He did. He came and he brought his wife with him, but he also brought his hoe, or his rake, I guess it was. So it was almost like the Grant Wood's American Gothic, you know, with that was
yeah, it's a great story.
Perhaps an unusual place to get married, but one that we enjoyed very much.
And you and Mary were married
53 years.
53 years. Yes, she died in 2000.
Yes.
Yes. You have won so many awards and are still active. And I have to ask you about the Guthrie. So many of us are so sad about it. I know last time we talked, you said it was almost like losing a child.
Absolutely.
Have you reconciled to the loss of it?
I don't suppose I ever shall. And of course, there's still a group that is working to hopefully preserve the building. That's a long and hard and difficult road to follow, of course, but and whether they'll be successful or not, I don't know. But yes, it is like losing, and that was a very personal thing for me. But on a broader sense, it's a great loss to the community.
Yes,
it's a great resource, and I've seldom met anyone that didn't know about the Guthrie and had seen plays and had experienced the building. And almost everybody simply can't believe that they might not keep the building.
I'm sure people in other parts of the
World,
United States and world are kind of appalled.
Yes.
An interesting thing that I learned in rereading your books was that when you were designing the Guthrie back in 1962-63, Sir Tyrone Guthrie and you had some pretty major disagreements about how to design it.
Well,
did you win out?
To a degree, but Mary, I could talk for several hours about Sir Tyrone. Sir Tyrant, I called him. He was a big man. He was 6'8". He had a beak-like nose and a strong jaw, and his whole life was one of directing people. Yes, we had differences about what the theater should be. I had no objections that he wanted to do a theater in the round or in the with a thrust stage, but the expression and the details of how that was done were a constant kind of source of discussion with us. We did have some wonderful battles, verbal, but interesting enough, the next day, it would be as though nothing had ever happened.
So there wasn't a sense
maybe
of...
it's maybe it's because of the years, maybe I'm getting older and perhaps milder, but I think it was his way of drawing me out. In other words, I could not simply say, I want to do this. I had to prove it.
You had to fight for your...
I had to prove it, and that, I think his way of getting me to do that was to make it very tense and very argumentative. And now whether that's true or not, but at least I like to think that now.
Perhaps.
He was an exciting, dynamic man to work with. Difficult, yes, but fun to work with in many ways. And yes, I think the theater expresses pretty much what I would have liked to have done. You
are working still and actively with Toby, your son, who is also a wonderful architect.
Yes.
And I read just recently about the Crystalline Conservatory out at the Arboretum,
Yes.
west of town, the University of Minnesota Arboretum. And you brought something here that is fascinating. I'll let you explain it. But this is going to be quite the building if the funds can be raised.
Well, it's I like to liken it to a pile of diamonds. Or another notion is when the ice breaks up on the North Shore, how it splinters and shatters. But those two images kind of convey the notion. This is quite a large thing. It's about the size of a football field.
Oh my!
It's some 50,000 square feet, and
we've got a sketch here that you did.
A small sketch.
That let's zero in on here
that's a
too.
sketch of or that's a photograph of a model that we have built.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. Here we go. It's beautiful, Ralph. So it's as long as a football field.
It'll be about that size, and it rises in places up to 85 feet high. It varies. And this little trinket that I'm showing you here, or have in my hand, is a structural module that we will be using. What it is, it's if we were to take a cube, and if we were to cut that cube into 11 faces, 5 pairs of triangles, and then there's one, the 11th face is a square. And these can be put together like Lego blocks, you know, as long as you match triangle against triangle or part triangle against part triangle.
Right.
And it becomes a space frame.
So the whole building would be made
and
of...
it'll vary in heights and configuration and so on, as you can see by that picture of the model.
Yes.
And
exquisite design.
it's going to be very exciting. I think it'll be a wonderful, dynamic place. And you know, there's a lot of people have asked about the Guthrie and the loss of the Guthrie and so on. And what are you going to do? May I tell a story that I have heard?
Certainly may.
I heard this story about several years ago by a black man who was a kind of a storyteller. And he told a story about a gentleman, a very old gentleman, and his very old donkey. And the donkey had served this gentleman so well for so many years. But finally the donkey got kind of tired and weary of all of this and became obstinate and difficult. And as the donkey became more and more brittle and less pliable, the gentleman likewise did. So, and they began to interrupt each other's lives, so that finally the old gentleman said, I'm going to get rid of my donkey. So he went out and dug a deep hole, and he pushed the donkey into the hole. And then he started filling up the hole, working rapidly to shovel the dirt back in. He didn't realize that as he was doing that, each time the dirt fell on the donkey shook it off and stamped it down. And finally the old gentleman got the hole filled. And lo and behold, there was the donkey still standing. And the moral to that story is that as bad things happen to you, as things get thrown at you and on you, the best thing to do is to shake it off, stamp it down, and move on to higher ground.
Rise above it.
So this glass house at the Arboretum and other work is my stamping down, moving on to higher ground.
Well, as long as you are creative, there's always something.
There's always something to do.
To create, and the future is, you know, ahead.
Yes, the bad things happen and so on, and and you simply have to go on and think about the future and what's the best thing you can do.
thinking to the past, though, the prefab home that
Yes.
you created way back in the 50s?
40s.
40s
Yeah.
is coming back, and out east they're doing a lot with that, and we want to also show you another, this is fun, show and tell here, another picture here. This is a sketch of the house that is becoming, you know, really, people are very interested in it.
There is a kind of a return to the early principles of contemporary architecture. But this design, as you mentioned, was the so-called Greenbelt House, was designed in 1944.
Okay, originally.
It never really got built, although it was built one time as a exhibition house.
Right, I read that.
And but now it's been picked up and it's being built as a prefab house out east.
And one person in particular kind of grabbed this,
Yes.
this concept, this design, and has kind of run with it, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And here's, I'll show you too a picture of the
That's one of the interiors.
interior.
That's the one-story version. There's a two-story version. Actually, the principle is that we have almost pavilions. A one-story would have two pavilions like the original glass house. Mm-hmm. Then we put a glass roof over the atrium part. The same is true with this, although the covering between the two will be different with each house.
What do you think your legacy is going to be, Ralph?
Well, I don't know. I hope it'll be some inspiration, some good example for mostly for young people in architecture and design to break the edges, if you will, of the box, to push the limits as far as they can, and to do good work. When Mary, my wife's last words said, "Be brave, work hard, and do good." In a sense, that would be my advice to any person. I hope that might be a kind of a legacy. Be brave,
work hard, and do good. You know, one of the things that I was intrigued with as I studied your life is your emphasis on designing for people.
Yes.
And I don't know enough about architecture to know if that is unique, but I think that it is. I mean, a lot of people just get excited about design for design's sake, but you always were thinking of the people that would be using.
Absolutely.
And can you say a bit about that?
You know, I have 10 principles of architecture, which I won't labor you with, but one of those principles is working with people, satisfying people's needs, their ambitions about the way they want to live, their environment, etc. And I don't ever believe that you copy or that you stand still, but you always try to find the ultimate, or what would be the next step. And so mankind is the yardstick around which architecture and all of our environment, our whole lives revolve around people and how we treat people, how we talk to people, how we love or hate or whatever. But so answering the aspirations and the needs and the hopes and fears of people is essential to my design of architecture.
And that's, yeah, it's a wonderful, I think that's one of your legacies, I'm going to guess. When you look back on your career, is there any one thing that you regret in terms of a decision you made?
I'm sure I made lots of mistakes, and no, not really. When we did the prefab houses, we looked back to this 1944 design and studied it very carefully and said, this is a good jumping off point. I found very little I would change about that. Yeah, there are lots of things that I suppose time is the great limitation there. I wish I could have taught many more young people. I wish I could have built many more buildings than I have. I wish I could have traveled more. There just isn't time to do all the things that are wonderful.
That carpe diem phrase, though, I think fits your life, seize the day. You have certainly done that with.
Well, I've tried to, yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming down.
Well,
we're out of
pleasure.
town already, out of time already. I too wish we had more time right now to talk about some of your furniture design. The rocker is also back in
production, yes.
Production, which is exciting.
We just received another batch of them.
Really?
So.
It's the Rapson rocker, and it's
the Rapson Rapid Rocker.
Rapid rocker. That's hard to say, Ralph.
Yes.
Yes. Check that out. I bet people could go to the website and find out more about that.
They can.
But thank you again for coming down.
Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to have
Enjoyed
you
it.
back. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back again next week. Until then, have a good week.